Hello. Well, hello, hello. Oh, muted, muted. Always muted. You. I can't hear you.
Hello, hello. I'm just talking away. Let's talking.
I could see the lips moving, but I couldn't hear a sound. The joys of technology.
Absolutely.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm Leanne,
And I am Jason. And
and
this
this
is Let's Talk.
Let's Talk. Today, we're looking at a fascinating topic for me around wealth and how your nervous system shapes money, safety, and abundance. So this space is where no topic is off limits. We're going to cover things from well-being to resilience to leadership to money to relationships and mindset and so much more.
And here at Let's Talk, we bring different perspectives, as always, real stories and honest conversations, because the things we don't talk about that often end up being the things that matter most and need to be talked about.
Yeah, especially this one, right? Money needs to be talked
Absolutely.
about. Yeah. So our goal here is simple. It's to spark new ideas, shift mindsets, and use practical tools that you can use in your leadership and your life.
Yeah, so whether you are tuning in today for some inspiration, some growth, or just a fresh perspective, let's talk.
Let's talk. So, again, welcome to the neuroscience of being human, which is what this series has been about. And so far, we've explored a whole range of stuff. We've looked at how your brain shapes behavior, emotional habits, emotions, I should say, habits, connection, decision making. Last week, we looked at courage and the fear of visibility and showing up. And today, we're bringing all of that into one of the most emotionally charged areas of life, really. And that's about money, because money isn't just numbers, it's deeply psychological, right? And this episode is called The Wealth Brain, because how you feel about, how you think about, and how you act around money is shaped by your nervous system. And it's often more than even the knowledge that we have about it. So we really want to kind of go into what is our resistance around money. Um, because most people have it. It's a taboo subject. Most people don't want to talk about it. Most people would rather bury their head in the sand than actually look at money. And I say most, but a big proportion of society. And I've noticed, particularly around women, money is even more of a hot topic because um, we're not educated around it. Actually, no one really is, but women specifically didn't even have bank accounts until the 1970s in their own name. So, it's an interesting conversation and something that's really useful for all of us to think about.
Yeah. And especially, for a lot of people in the world who live paycheck to paycheck, it's like they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to look at it. They're like, I know I'm getting my next paycheck, it'll pay the bills, and I have a little left over. And, so yeah, really excited about today's conversation. And hopefully you, our viewers, will be getting some good information, some gold nuggets, and just, some tools and tips that you can take into life in regard to this conversation. So, with all that said, let's start with a simple question. Why does money feel so emotional? And and the reason why is because the brain and money, or the brain represents money as safety. Like, money's going to make me safe. It's going to be able to pay the bills. It's going to give me comfort, etc. And so that's why there's so much emotion around it, especially when it gets a little disruptive, right? So historically, resources throughout time have equaled survival. But in today's modern day, money equals that security, it equals options, you know, whether you can go to school or whether you can't go to school or where you go to school, um, and stability, right? And we hear people talk about that all the time in different nuances, right? So if you really listen deeply when you're in conversation with people, there's always kind of somewhere in the conversation, there's always money tied into it, whether it's through experiences, um, uh, being able to do things, travel, etc. So, with that, the brain links money to safety. Like, okay, I have a home, or I have an apartment or a condo. Money helps me afford to have that home, right? Um, Control depends how you look at control. I mean, sometimes it could be in a place of business, like somebody's status level or somebody's position level. Obviously, the higher position you have, most times out of not, you make more money than the people who either report to you or who have lower titles. So it can mean control in a business sense or family sense, personal life, etc. It also represents freedom, the freedom to be able to, go out to the happy hours or go on those trips, or, be able to go to that concert you've always wanted to go to. So it also allows you to like be able to get out of your house, in your home, whatever that looks like, to go do things. It also, interestingly, has a link to belonging, how you belong to different groups of people, status in different groups, etc. And then also there's identity wrapped around money, like sometimes too much identity, and then sometimes not enough identity. So I think that's somewhere in the middle from my point of view, is kind of that sweet spot. So with that said, when money feels uncertain, the nervous system can go into that threat mode. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Leeanne, to talk a little bit about um, the brain and financial behavior.
Yeah. I just wanted to double click on a couple of things that you said there, Jason, because I think it's really interesting. One of my key desires in life is freedom, and money does allow us freedom, right? Like it really does. The freedom to have choices, the freedom to do things, the freedom to get outside of ourselves. Um, and so that's a really interesting one for me. And many people get stuck in situations because of lack of finance. So
Mm-hmm.
whether it's domestic violence, whether it's where I have to live, all sorts of stuff is really triggered by the amount of resources that we have. And you see it happen all the time that people want to do something different, but they can't because of their financial resources at the time. And the other one that I think is really interesting is this identity thing, because oftentimes the identity that we have around money, well, isn't ours. It was thrust upon us by our families or our society or our schooling or our community or all sorts of stuff, and um, so the stories that we have about money shape our identity with money.
Mm-hmm.
And we really need to kind of lift the rug on that and have a look at what is the story that we have, because if we can't identify as being wealthy, then we won't be wealthy, right? So our identity really matters. And that's something that we can change and shape with practice over time. So I just wanted to double click on those two because I think it's so important. So let's have a look at financial intelligence, shall we say. So, because even financially intelligent people can make quite emotional decisions when it comes to money. So we might know better, but when our emotions kick in, right, we might choose differently. And a lot of the time that can happen. Like we might have a desire for something and then the scarcity mindset kicks in and we don't do it. Or, the itty bitty committee kicks in and then we don't do what we need to do to increase our ability to earn resources. So when the
Mm-hmm.
nervous system is activated, our clarity can drop. So if we start getting fearful and that scarcity comes in, we're not thinking clearly. We're thinking from a fear state. And that's
Mhm.
not actually serving us to make good decisions or to actually lean into new opportunities or take calculated risks, because it's okay to take risks so long as they're calculated risks. And so long as you've got an appetite for riding the wave, right? But when we're in that fear state, that clarity of distance kind of disappears, and all we can see is what's scaring us as opposed to doing something differently.
Mhm.
The other part that I find interesting, which is kind of counterbalancing that, is impulsivity increases. So we don't think things through because our clarity has gone out the window, but we can become more compulsive. We do silly things, right? Um, and that's not necessarily great either, because it's okay to be impulsive and to have a bit of spontaneity in your life, but not around crucial decisions. And to give you a story about this, my car kind of started smoking and billowing smoke, and it was terrible and terrifying. So I took it to the mechanic, and they said it's going to cost you something like $14,000 to fix it. Like, it was ridiculous. And I thought, well, I'm not spending that on an older car. I'm better off getting a new car. But because I was desperate, right? I didn't have the clarity of thinking. I picked pretty much the first car I went to see without doing much resource, much research around it. I've got a large family. I've got 3 kids. There's always people with us. So I needed a 7-seater. That was my criteria. It has to have 7 seats. But I didn't check a whole lot of other things that were important to me, because that impulsivity kicked in, and I became desperate. And it's like, I need to make this decision. In hindsight, when I looked at it later, it was like, this doesn't have a CD player. It doesn't automatically Bluetooth to Apple Play. I've got to use plugs. Like, there were certain things that would have been more important, well, as important to me, that I didn't research because of that impulsivity, right? Because of that fear state and that desperation almost. So we can make silly decisions that can cost us a lot if we don't have the clarity of thinking, really. The other part that shows up around financial intelligence is, or when our emotions kick in around financial intelligence, is that we get into avoidance. We don't look at the bank account. We don't do a budget, because doing a budget is terrifying, because all of a sudden I realize how much I actually spend versus how much I actually earn. So in avoidance kicks in. We don't look at the checks and balances. We're not actually being proactive about our money and our resources. We kind of get into this avoidance state. And as you said earlier, live from paycheck to paycheck without actually planning for a future or planning for anything else, right? Hoping by some miraculous intervention that things will change, but we're not actually doing that because we're hiding from it. So that avoidance kicks in. And avoiding can look like a few different things. It can be that avoiding at looking at our accounts, like we just won't. It could be the opposite of that, which is emotional spending, that where we kind of retail therapy is the word for it. I need the shoes. I need the shoes. Do I really need? No. But we get into this emotional spending, right? So for me, I emotionally spent on a car that wasn't useful. Well, it was useful, but it wasn't ideal. But we get into this kind of emotional spending, and that can look like a whole range of things. Like, I know if you saw my house, you would laugh because I have more books than most libraries. And that's my emotional spending. It's like, oh, I'm okay to spend on that because that's enriching my brain. But really, do I need another 7 books every time I go out? Probably not. So we get into this kind of routine of things that we do. The other thing that we do, and we spoke about this when we looked at bias a few weeks ago around that risk of sunk cost fallacy and that risk aversion, is that we can hold on to bad investments for too long, or we can sell what we think is bad investments at a bad time, right? So we need to have people around us that understand the market, that understand what's going on, even if you don't. But what I would highly recommend, even more so, is learn it. Like, all of the financial literacy in the world is out there. We've got information at our fingertips. There's so much resource that we can tap into, especially in today's environment with the use of AI, with the use of technology. But there's also professionals out there that can kind of give us information. So we don't want to hold on to a bad investment for too long, and we don't want to keep funding bad investments. But on the other hand, we don't want to sell something as soon as the market flips and make a loss. Whereas if we hold on, it'll come back good. So having some idea about that for yourself, and also surrounding yourself with people who are in the game, who understand it, who can give you good advice, is really useful. Um, and the other thing that I see is so much in my clients, and I coach a lot of business owners and coaches and a whole range of stuff, is that they undervalue and undercharge themselves, right? They're too scared to ask for the money that they're actually entitled to or that they're worth, and they end up kind of undercutting themselves and the industry that they're in because of that fear around, am I actually worth that? Well, you bloody are. And but I see it a lot. And I know that you and I have even had conversations around this, Jason, when we're putting programs together or going into corporates, and I'm like, oh, I don't know what to charge, like that
Mhm.
whole kind of value and identity around money and around our worth can kick in when we're in that fear state or that scarcity mentality. And you see it happen lots and lots. So, financial behavior is actually emotion regulation in disguise, like good financial behavior. And Jason and I talk about emotional regulation at nauseum sometimes because it is the keystone to everything.
Yes.
It really is, right? So if we can regulate ourselves, then we can have more clarity. We can make better decisions. We don't live in avoidance. We actually do what needs to be done. We get the information that we need. We make good choices, right? Because we're regulated. But if we're in a fear state or a dysregulated state, then we're going to be doing the impulse buying and the retail therapy and making poor decisions and doing things that don't actually serve us. So, you know, financial behavior, I'll say it again, is often emotion and regulation in disguise. So, regulate first is I mean, you've heard us say that week after week after the week, right? Regulate yourself first because it really is the key.
Yeah, and a couple things, Leanne, that you made me think about when you were talking through some of the examples. So I just started on Netflix watching Hoarders, and you know, and like on one of the episodes last night, this woman was talking about, like, she just loves like thrift store shopping and shopping for everyone in her family and the thrill of it, right? But then gets home and tosses it in a pile, but never gets to actually, giving the gifts, right? And so I think that speaks a lot into that impulsivity, and then the avoidance starts. Because it's interesting, because that show has like different psychologists, that are kind of working with the different situations, and there's so much of avoidance that and walls that are put up, when asked those deep questions about the why.
I would say avoidance and attachment, emotional
Yeah,
attachment to things, right? Like,
absolutely.
the stories that we tell ourselves is really interesting. So, yeah.
Yeah. And then one other thing I want to double click on when you were talking about, like, you know, like as a consultant, like, are you worth that dollar amount per hour? Yes, you are. And I also think too, if any advice I could give, because I've suffered through this in different parts of my career when I was working internally, was it's like looking at those jobs, you may not fit every single itty bitty criteria that's in the job description, but you like the number that you see on the salary. But then that self-doubt starts going in of like, well, I don't have everything. Am I really worth that? That annual salary? It's like, yeah, you are. Like, there's no perfect candidate out there that's going to fit every single minute criteria in a job description. So for those who suffer from that self-doubt, you know, just remember that's normal. like that's normal thoughts, but yeah, when you get into that self-awareness and you self-regulate, yeah, you are worth it. And so I just wanted to put that in there because oftentimes I see a lot of people when they apply for full-time jobs, they like, well, I haven't managed $1 million budget. Well, maybe you manage a $600,000 budget, like you still know how to manage budget, you know?
And, we're always learning, evolving, adapting, growing. Right? So I might not tick every box yet, but I know I can learn, right? So don't look at where you are now as the full stop. Like it's a comma, right? And you can continue. And I think sometimes we need to remind ourselves of that. Like with a growth mindset, it's like, I don't know how to do that yet, but I can learn. And I think if you can go in with that sort of attitude around, okay, well, I tick a lot of the boxes and the things that I don't know yet, I can learn um, and adapt. And that's a skill, like emotional agility, right? That ability to be able to adapt and pivot as needed. And Jason, you and I just did a seminar on emotional agility. We were on a workshop
Mhm.
the other day. And it is emotional intelligence, like being able to regulate yourself and being flexible at the same time. Right. And I think, if we can marry those two things up in all areas of our life, but particularly when it comes to finances, because this is the one thing that will cause more of a threat state in people than most other things. It breaks
Oh,
relationships. It
absolutely.
does all sorts of horrors if we don't take control. And I say control loosely, but at least some sort of um, accountability and responsibility um, for our financial state and our wealth mindset.
Absolutely. Which leads perfectly into our next topic of our conversation today, which is scarcity versus abundance. We all love that word abundance more than scarcity, right? But it's good and it's fair to talk about both. So first, let's talk about scarcity because people hear this a lot. And I mean, and even if you take note in conversations, especially during times of like economic volatility, which we're definitely in here in the United States for sure.
Globally.
Inflation and all that. So, there's a lot more I hear just in conversation, even just like standing in a coffee line and listen to other people's conversations. There's that scarcity as you're paying for your $7 12-ounce coffee. Um, to be like, should I really be spending this $7 on this, drip or not? And with that, scarcity isn't just a mindset, it's often a nervous system state. So when we talk about scarcity wiring, from a neuroscience point of view, um, we get into these states of like hyper focusing around the lack of. Like, oh my gosh, my bank account only has $1,000, but my rent in 2 weeks is 1,500. Where am I going to get that? So you hyper focus. And like Leanne was talking about earlier, is that, this is one of the biggest emotional states that we get in where our threat can be on overload a lot, right? And then there comes that fear of loss, right? Of like, shit, if I don't pay my rent on time, not necessarily saying you're going to lose your apartment or lose your house, but you might have a fee attached to it. So then there's that worry about that too. And so there's that if I don't have enough, I'm going to lose A, B, and C. And so there's these like layers of worrying that um, show up and just make your threat state even that much more vulnerable and on overload. And then there's that overprotection, right? Overprotecting things and overprotecting relationships. And, like I've even seen where, household may be having some money issues, right? But it's like the two don't talk to one another because it's like you're almost well, if I can figure this out on my own on the side here, then it's not gonna, so it's like you're protecting the relationship from a difficult conversation, right? But then the other person in that relationship may be worrying about it too, and then not saying anything. So definitely, I think there's something around financial literacy and intelligence, but then the communication that goes with it, right? Excuse me. And then contraction. And yeah, I mean, it's just so interesting how all these, examples of scarcity um, can just add up. And like sometimes they're like multi going on at the same time. So your threat state is even that much more on overload. And, when if you don't have that self-awareness, and I think you would agree here, Leanne, with that, if you don't have that self-awareness, you're not going to be able to self-regulate as well. I mean, you may have moments of self-regulation, but that self-awareness is really going to have you really take that step back and say, okay, I need to regulate here so that I can think with clarity. Because I've been there in my life too, especially before I had a lot of emotional intelligence training, emotional regulation training, neuroscience training, where it's, sometimes I was just off the rocker inside my head and inside my body. And reflecting back on it now, it was all living in my nervous system. But I didn't have the tools to actually be like, okay, Jason, take a step back. You're going to be okay. Do some breathing, look at things clearly. You don't have to look at all this at the same time. You can, chunk it out. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Leeanne, to talk about the abundance portion of this part of the conversation.
Yeah, and I will. And I will.
Giving us all money, right?
I will. But I just wanted to double click on a couple of things that you said there, because that scarcity mindset can creep in without us even being aware of it. It's in our language, it's in the things we say, it's how we show up. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And to give an example, I had to take my son to a dance thing in LA, actually, a couple of years ago. And what I noticed on that trip was, because Australian dollar versus American dollar is like 66 cents or something. So, but when we leave the country, we're losing almost half our money if we're traveling to the States. And then things are on par. So, if McDonald's here costs $15, it costs $15 in the US. But when we're already losing money, that's almost $30, right? Mm-hmm. And the whole trip, it was horrible for me because I had that scarcity happening without me being consciously aware of it at the time. Like I was aware of it, but I couldn't regulate it. And it was like, and so it was an awful time for me, because every time I was tapping my card or doing something, this kind of angst was coming up and I was constricting. Like I was playing small, right? Because it was like,
because you see the dollar signs,
right? It was
you
not
your balanced,
yeah.
minusing
And double minusing, right? Almost. So it was a real issue for me, and I really wasn't enjoying it. Anyway, a year later, I went to Europe with my family, and I made the conscious decision before I left that I am not doing that again. I am not going to ruin this holiday based on scarcity, and based on fear, and based on the rest of it, because our dollar to the European euro is pretty much the same as America. We lose half the second we get on the airplane, right? Like it's terrible. Anyway, and the European trip was fantastic, and we had a great time. And like I just said yes to everything. And my theory was, I understand money, I understand my mindset, I understand my capacity to earn money. If worse comes to worse, I can get a second job.
Yeah.
I can put things on a credit card and pay it off quickly. I don't condone credit card debt because you're paying 22% interest, and we can just get into this tap frenzy, and it's not great for us. But it's a means sometimes to an end. Like I wanted a good holiday. It was useful, and then you pay it off quickly, right? So,
Yeah.
but I was able to kind of speak myself into regulation on the second holiday, which I wasn't able to do on the first. Like the first was awful for me. And no doubt for my son too, because every time he asked for something, I'm like, you know, You don't want that to be the memory, right? Like, you don't want it
Right.
to be the memory. So that whole constriction piece where we kind of close in and we shut down and it feels awful. And to have more of an abundance mentality really helps because if we think abundantly, it opens us up. We're able to kind of be more aware of opportunities because we're not kind of hyper focused. We've actually got more of an open view. We can see opportunities as they come in. It feels better in our system, because we are open, we are experiencing life in the moment rather than from fear. Um, so our abundance mentality, even our languaging, like if we're saying, "Oh, I don't know if we can do that," or "I don't know if I can afford that," we're speaking scarcity into our being. Whereas if it's like, "Okay, well, let me find a way," that's more abundance mentality and languaging, right? I don't know how, but I'm going to find a way. This is important to me. So we get more creative. We get kind of a
Mhm.
little bit more playful. We get more um, thoughtful about, well, how else can I do this potentially? Like that creativity kicks in. And which is really useful if you're an entrepreneur or solopreneur, but even in the workplace, how can I add more value and increase my income? Could be
Mhm.
another way, but we can actually see things more creatively when we're in that abundant mentality.
Yeah.
We also have longer term thinking. We're not thinking about saving ourselves in this moment. We're more thinking about, well, my future and how do I adapt that and how can I um, think about what I want to do next week, next month, next year. Okay, I want to go on a holiday. What do I need? Like, okay, I'm going to need about X amount of dollars. Great, work backwards. How much do I have to save every day or every week in order to make that happen? So we have that longer term view and that longer term thinking, which is
Mhm.
really helpful. When we're in scarcity, we're kind of here and now and just kind of dog paddling, trying to save ourselves, right? It's a
Yeah.
completely different mindset. And the world is full of possibility when we're in abundance mindset. Right? There's possibilities everywhere. As I said, one of the things I said to myself is, okay, I can get an extra job if I need to. Like, that's a possibility. But there's also a possibility of, I earn X amount of dollars. If I just save a little bit and keep adding to that, the possibility grows, the resources grow,
Mhm.
interest comes in. They did a study on somebody who put $100 a week into an account over a 10-year period and somebody who didn't do that. Um, and they're I think it was 10 or 25 years. I think it might have been 20 years. Anyway, $100 a week was something that they just did. By the end of 20 years, they had more than $1.5 million in savings because interest compounds on top of what you're saving. It all adds up and it starts doing that. And we might not be able to put $100 a week away, but can you put $5? Can you put $10?
Yeah.
Right? The possibilities are endless. Can I get more work? Can I increase my value? Can I study something or learn
Mhm.
something to increase my ability to earn? So possibility is there. So the one thing I want to say about this is that it's really hard for your brain to choose abundance when it feels unsafe, though. And so we've got to change our narrative. We've got to change our conversations. We've got to change the way we're communicating about this sort of stuff to ourselves, right?
Mhm.
To ourselves, not so even, and to other people as well, because we don't want to project our scarcity and fear mindset onto others. But changing our language, even just adding the word yet, like I can't afford that yet, but I'm going to find a way. I
Yeah.
can't, I'm not sure how to do that yet, but I could learn. You know, just by adding the word yet, having that growth mindset, having more of that abundance mentality, which changes everything. And the other thing I want to talk about around this particular topic is energy, because finance and money is an energy. Business is a spiritual game, really, and money is a spiritual game. So if I'm sitting in fear, I am attracting more of that into my life. Whereas if
Mhm.
I'm sitting in more abundance, I'm attracting more of that into my life. We become the sum total of what we're experiencing and the people around us. So if we're sitting with lots of fear mongering and everyone's talking about the scarcity and the fear and all the rest of it, it's going to impact our energy and we're going to create more of that in our world. Whereas if we're having more of these abundant conversations, talking more about what's possible as opposed to the fear, yes, that's all still there. We're not toxic positivity and not actually looking at it and going, that's a real concern. And what can I do about that? What's in my control? What do I have agency over? Um, and the one thing particularly that we do have control over is ourselves and our internal narrative. Like if we notice that we're going into that fear state, we can cut it off and go, oh no, there's, fearful Freddie coming up in my committee who's on loudspeaker at the moment. I don't need to be listening to that. I can actually choose to say, actually, there's abundance all around. And
Mm-hmm.
there is. If we look at life, there's abundance. There's an abundance of resources. There's abundance um, of opportunities. So there's an abundance of stuff. But our mindset will either let us see the abundance or it won't. And if we're in scarcity, we're not going to see the opportunity. We're not going to be creative. But if we're in abundance mentality, we're going to see a whole lot more. And the other thing that I often tell my clients to do is to, thank the universe all the time, even in advance, like it's already happened. I mean, they talk about this when they talk about manifesting and all, the secret and all of this sort of stuff. But just by saying thank you for the abundance that's hit my account today,
Yeah.
it's such an interesting statement. And I started doing that regularly. And what I noticed was more abundance was hitting my account or less money was leaving. Like, people were
Yeah.
saying, "Oh, when you come and see us, you don't need to pay for accommodation. Come and stay." Like that saved me thousands of dollars on a trip. That was abundance hitting my account. It may not have been the way I was hoping it would by money dropping into it, but it was money not leaving it, which is actually the same thing, right? It could be that I noticed that I put my hand in my pocket and there was $10 sitting there. And it's like, I don't even remember putting that there, but hey, thank you for the
Mhm.
abundance that's hitting my account today. So I say that every day now, and I'm often chuffed at just what shows up. And it could be little things like somebody bought me a coffee, like, thank you for the abundance that hit my account today. And if we can start seeing abundance as a whole thing, not just a money thing, but all the energy that's coming towards me, it changes our state and the way we show up in the world. And it actually just feels a whole lot better than the fear mongering and the constriction that happens, right? I'd rather be open and expansive and grateful than being cynical and scared and living in that toxicity.
Yeah. It's interesting because as you were kind of talking through the abundance part, you know, in one of my doctoral program classes, which this particular class actually occurred before we started our podcast, but it was creative solutions and implementation. So it was like a strategic leadership class. But they were talking about mindset. And obviously, they were talking about mindset in business, right? But part of business is making money and spending money and all that. But they had this really great analogy is that to really move the mark forward, you need to have a combination mindset of entrepreneurship, innovation, and creativity. Like it really takes all those three to really move the mark forward. And so I was thinking about it kind of in this abundance, right? Like, yeah, like if you need $5,000 for this particular vacation, yeah, you might have to be a little innovative and creative on how you're going to make that $5,000 so that, it's not affecting this other, like this other pot that you use to live in and pay bills and all the et ceteras there. So, and when you have that entrepreneurial mindset, right, you're just always on the, okay, how are we going to do this? I'm wearing the marketing hat, the finance hat, the public relations hat, the administrative assistant hat, et cetera. So I think when you combined all those three, entrepreneurship, innovation, creativity together, like some magical things can really, really happen. And I do agree with you on the energy front and the gratitude front. It because it's amazing when you have a gratitude mindset also on just how things feel better. Just you feel better as a human being. almost.
You do. Life just feels better in general. And as you said that, it reminds me of Tony Robbins' comment, and that is that, oh, gratitude. Oh, that's what I was going to say. What we focus on grows.
Yeah.
What we focus on grows. If we focus on scarcity and what we don't have, that grows. What we focus on grows, right? Because what's wrong is always there, but so is what's right. And we
Yeah.
can choose at any point what to watch for. But I know for me, my life just feels better when I live in gratitude, when I'm looking at the opportunities and the possibilities, when I have that kind of more abundance mindset. Um, my life feels better. And don't get me wrong, life happens to us. You know, when I went through a divorce, I remember scarcity kicked in because all of a sudden it was on me. Everything was on me. I had to, the household and the bills and it was all on me. And that sent me into a fear state around my capability. But what I noticed it did, it constricted me. I wasn't able to be creative, innovative,
Hmm.
this entrepreneurial mindset because of the fear. And once I caught myself in that, it was like, hang on a second, you only need enough for this month. Like, well, what can you do? So rather than, catastrophizing my whole life and, oh my God, how am I going to make this happen? And, the kids are going to be starving and blah, blah, blah. It was like, okay, well, what do I need for this month? And then
Yeah.
how can I creatively do that? So we can chunk things down to make it more manageable. So life can show up and send us into states, even if it's not your natural state, but we have control and agency over that at any particular point. So what you
Absolutely.
focus on grows, right? So focus on the good, the positive, the abundance, the gratitude, because not only do we feel better, we show up better and more opportunities are then present.
Yeah. And the one thing too, I noticed, not to go down this rabbit hole, but like I think when you live and operate and show up in those mindsets, like you actually at the end of the day, you sleep better too.
Yeah.
Because it's amazing what that rewiring of your body into that gratitude state, how that can actually like just ground you to sleep better. And as not being in my 20s anymore and surviving off of 4 or 5 hours of sleep, like that sleep component is just so like it's amazing on how important that is. And um so I mean, not saying that you have to do a gratitude practice before you go to sleep, but if you kind of show up in that throughout your day, it just kind of becomes part of who you are. And when you sleep better, you also show up better, just in all areas of life.
Yep.
Yep.
And yet, yep. And yet for many of us, we wear sleep deprivation as a badge of honor. And that's a
Yep.
really sad thing because when we sleep, it also regulates our emotions. But sleep it's so useful. If we're not getting enough sleep, we're tired, we're grumpy, and fear is more likely to step in.
Yep. Absolutely. So, should we talk about some strategies,
Yeah,
Leon,
let's
and
do
how
that.
people can shift from this scarcity mindset to an abundance mindset?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start with the first one, Jason. And the first one is awareness before strategy. Like you can't strategize or you can't out strategize a dysregulated nervous system. You just can't. Um, we need to notice our emotional state. We need to notice our emotional triggers. We need to notice our patterns of behavior. Like if we can recognize our patterns, we can then interrupt them and then we can create new patterns for ourselves that are more useful. So we need to be mindful of that. We've got to check in with our beliefs. Like, what's my belief about this? And what's my belief about money? And what's my belief about what I'm worth? Right? Like really checking into this belief system because our BS, our belief systems or bullshit, whatever you want to call them, really impacts everything in our lives, right? So you need to have this awareness phase, this this looking within, right? Like this internal, because as we say all the time, it's an inside job,
Hmm.
right? And what's happening inside is going to show up and reflect on the outside. So we really want to make sure that we can have this awareness, this internal view of the world, so we can regulate our nervous system as opposed to living in a dysregulated one, which then means that we're not actually showing up to our best selves. Do you want to speak about the second one?
Yeah. And so the second strategy, which has three tools, is to regulate your emotions and yourself to safety first. Be able to take that step back, regulate, so that you can make more um, or make decisions in a better way. So, some ways to do this is to ground yourself. Ground, do some breathing, do some meditation, maybe go for a walk, listen to some music, but just ground yourself so that you can feel okay. And then, not every decision needs to be a quick decision, right? So, and I know a lot of times with money, it's like, well, we got to make decisions quickly, because, sometimes we're always thinking, who's being affected on the other side. Well, if you make a bad decision, you're going to be affected too, right? So slow down your financial decisions. Um, and in order to slow down, you have to ground yourself. And then third, create calm before action. So that's part of the grounding, calming yourself so that you have a clear state of mind, clear thinking, and that you can actually make those better decisions. And, yeah, there might be some decisions that have to be made quickly, but then there's others of like, what? This doesn't need to be made until next week. And that's okay. So also prioritizing what decisions need, especially in the financial realm, what needs to be made now versus what can be made later. Do you want to talk about the third one?
I will. And I just want to say, usually, if we're in a fear state, it's because we're thinking about what happened in the past or we're projecting what's going to happen in the future. So,
Mm-hmm.
part of this grounding and creating this calm space is to be here now, get into your body, ground that energy. Because most of the fear and scarcity is future projection. It's about what's going to happen next week when I pay the rent. Like it's not about what's happening in this very moment.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, all of our fear comes from the past or the future, really.
Yeah.
Very
Yeah.
rarely, very rarely is it something that's happening right now in this moment. So I just
Yeah.
wanted to say that.
Yeah. Because sometimes you're thinking of a past financial decision that went south.
Yeah.
So, you're like, I don't want that to happen again. But if you're not calm and regulated, you're gonna make trip ups and mistakes. So
Or live in avoidance and make no decision, which is even more detrimental.
yeah, exactly.
So the third one here is to shift your identity and your language. Like really, the words that we say have such a profound impact on our internal state. So instead of saying I'm bad with money, shift that to, well, I'm learning how to manage money intentionally. Or I
Mhm.
can't afford this. Well, I'm finding ways to be creative about coming up with that. So shifting our language is going to have a profound impact on our internal system and our identity, because identity drives behavior more than knowledge. So if we're identifying with the possibility that something is there is potential for it, that's going to then drive our behavior. It's going to open us up to be more creative. Whereas if we're saying, I can't afford it, it's like, oh, shut down. There are no opportunities there. So our language really shapes our identity, and also looking back into your past, right? Like what stories am I carrying forward that no longer are relevant? Yes, I might have made a bad financial decision in the past, but you learn. And you're
Mhm.
not going to make that same mistake again, because this time you'll do a bit more research, or you'll slow down the process, or something will happen, or you learned a heap through that, that bad decision. So we're not the same person we were then. And the decision isn't going to be the same as it was then necessarily. Like we have agency over that. So don't hold on to the past. I'm not ever going to bring that into the future because then we're not showing up fully. Instead, look at what happened in the past. What can I learn from that? What skills or resources do I need to ensure that that doesn't happen again? And then do that. So
Mhm.
shifting our identity definitely shifts our behavior, and our behavior around money shifts our future. Right? Like
Yeah.
what we do today will change how we show up tomorrow. So I think it's such an important one that
Yeah. And then our last strategy is building small evidence, right? So part of that is like celebrating the small financial wins, right? I mean, so many people think all the time, it's only the big grandiose wins that we celebrate and do the big rah ha ha around. But if you have gratitude and celebrate those small wins lead up to that big win, right? So if it was like, hey, I was able to put $100 away this week, awesome, celebrate that win. You know,
yeah.
it doesn't have to be, oh, that there's $10,000 in my account, right? Those small steps equal big wins. And then also consistent, repetitive behaviors, healthy ones, like, I mean, it could be putting a little bit each week into your account, whatever it may be, whether it's $100, it's $5, it's 15, right? Enhancing your emotional literacy. Like if you're like, you know what, I'm going to watch one YouTube video a week. Awesome. Or if you want to read a book, like Leeanne, go to Leanne's house, and I'm sure she has a big library on. But it's putting in those consistent, repetitive behaviors that's going to move that mark just a little bit to the better. And then have have gratitude. Have gratitude. Like Leanne said a little bit earlier, put those you know like that blessing of like, thank you for helping me save $1,000 by staying at a friend's house. Or, if the money's coming in, then, you know, do that gratitude as well, because it just makes you feel better, think more clearly, and just be more consistently regulated.
And the other part of that that they often talk about around abundance is also being grateful for blessing somebody else with your money. So if you're paying for something, rather
Yeah.
than feeling like you're getting sucker punched every time money goes out of your account, it's like, oh, I'm actually blessing somebody else right now with with my resources or whatever the case may be. So being grateful for the ability to be able to spend as well as save is really useful. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. Jason, I just wanted to reiterate this. Oftentimes people will try and pay all their bills and then save a little bit. And one of the things that I think is there's a great book. I think I've mentioned it before in our previous series, but it was called The Richest Man in Babylon. And it's an older book. It's been around for a very long time, but they flip it. They pay themselves first. So put
Mm-hmm.
$10 away first and then live off the rest. And interestingly, you'll be able to. But if you try and pay all your bills and then save, there's often nothing left. So even that tiny little shift of I'm going to put that away first and then pay everything else off. And it makes a big difference. And people are often surprised about how much they have left over actually at the end now that they've just flipped the way that they're doing things. So um yeah, I just wanted to
Yeah.
highlight that.
Well, and what you made me think of, it was something that I heard, and I maybe we did mention it in one of our past episodes where, there was that same analogy on like as you're filling up your calendar for the week, schedule in your fun first, then your meetings. Because if you do it the other way around, then there's no time left, or you're too freaking exhausted to then be like, oh, you know what, I'll just leave it till next week. And then it's like that next week turns into the next week. So, um, So yeah, you maybe me had that insight, and I can't remember if we mentioned it in one of our episodes or
I'm
if it
pretty
was
sure
just
we did.
something.
Yeah,
Okay,
no, I'm pretty sure we did.
okay. So with that, and before we move into our tips and resources, is that the brain trusts evidence, not intention, and that money is more about meaning than it is about the math.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because I mean, I've been in those states too, Leanne, where you said it's like you tap your card and you're like, oh shit, like another $30 went out, and it's like, it's like you're continually doing math in your head, and that's where your attention is versus like, hey, you know what? I'm taking this great trip with my child in the States, blah, blah, blah. So,
It was the greatest lesson for me, really. It was a great lesson, as uncomfortable as it was at the time. It really kind of smacked me upside the head around, I'm never doing that to myself or my kids or anybody else again, right? Like, I'm just not going to do that. I want to live with an abundance mindset. I want to live in the hopeful belief of things, that are going to come my way and that I have the capability of creating different things. Um, and to have wonderful experiences, because really money is a vehicle for life. It's not life. It's not all
yeah,
about the money. Like, the money is just a vehicle to give you the life that you and so start thinking about, what do I want, as opposed to what do I need to survive, and then that will also change that internal dialogue.
yeah, absolutely. Awesome. So we move to top tips.
Let's do it.
Okay. Okay, so our top three tips for from today's amazing conversation about the wealth brain and how the money lives in the nervous system is tip one: money is processed by the brain as a safety signal. Remember that it looks for safety, it looks for the safety of your money, how it's being spent, and protecting you from not being safe. And secondly, excuse me, that your financial decisions are shaped by your emotional state. So I think the biggest thing at a tip number two is self-regulation. Regulate yourself first, then make decisions. And then prioritize when decisions have to be made. Versus then putting yourself in a state of overwhelm, thinking that all financial decisions have to be made right now or in this moment or at the same time. So yes, emotional regulation is step one, then decision making is step two. And third, wealth grows when your safety and identity are aligned. So when you feel aligned and you feel safe, and both of those are working in synergy together, then that's when wealth grows because you're also going to be in a different mindset. Yeah. Awesome.
Absolutely.
Anything else you want to say on this, Leanne?
No,
Okay.
I mean, listen, I could talk for hours about this, but I won't. Yeah, I won't. I'll go into the books and resources, Jason.
Oh,
So, as usual, my favorite thing is the books and the resources. So, one of the great books I mentioned earlier was The Richest Men in Babylon. It's a great book to read. It's not on the screen, but I highly recommend it. There's also Your Money, Your Brain by Jason Zweig, and it's got a lot of the linking between neuroscience and money and decisions, right? So it's a really good um, book on explaining fear, greed, bias, and how all of that kind of interrupts our money mindset. Right? So great book to read. The next one is You're a Badass at Baking Money by Jen Sincero. And she's just got such a delightful way of writing. She shares real stories about herself. But this one kind of links your self worth and your confidence to that internal world and money, and how you can shift that and navigate that space. It's energetic, it's bold, it's empowering, and it's really a useful book just to get really clear on what is the story I'm telling myself and how can I change that. So they're the books that I would recommend. And then this TED talk on how to stop your money anxiety and start building wealth today. It's a really good, it's about 10 or 15 minutes. It's not a long um, thing to watch, but he's got some great tips and strategies. But he also talks about what happens internally and how to
Mhm.
navigate that space. So it's very much in alignment with the conversation that we've had today. And again, we'll put the links and the resources in the YouTube channel to make it easy for you to find. But they're the ones that I'm highly recommending in today's session.
Yes, absolutely. And definitely recommend watching the TED Talk.
Yeah.
Um,
And it's so
it is,
funny because he starts his name is Bill Cates, and he goes, "I bet you all thought you were seeing somebody else, right? It's a C, not a G." Like, he's entertaining, but it very good information in it.
absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. And also to our viewers, sorry about earlier, my screen froze and I froze. And so that's why you saw a couple slides earlier. Um, but our final episode in the Neuroscience of Being Human, episode 20, I believe we're already at the end of this one, Leanne, um, is identity upgrades, becoming the future you. So there's going to be lots of great information and I'm imagining tidbits from the other 7 episodes in this series to really look at becoming your future self. So, which is also crazy that we're going to be in the last full week of March next week already. So it will be held, as always, on Wednesdays, which is March 25th at 3:30 p.m. And it'll be Thursday, March 26th at 9:30 a.m. in Sydney.
And then our time changes, which is gonna be a bit disruptive for all of us. And so you've had your time
Yes.
change already, ours is coming.
Yes. And we will have, during next week's episode, we will have what our new series is going to be. So it's a big surprise. We can't wait to announce it to everyone. And with that, I think we're ready to do the close.
Absolutely.
Okay. So, as always, thanks for joining us for today's conversation on the wealth brain, how your nervous system shapes money, safety, and abundance.
And we again hope that it sparked something new, a fresh insight, a new perspective, or even just a little bit more courage now to start looking at and planning out your financial future. Um, because this is, like I say, one of the topics that causes the most fear. And if we can give you just something, whether it's a question worth exploring, a new perspective, or that little bit of hope that there is an ability to shift our financial state, then we're hoping that you took that away today.
Absolutely. And as always, our mission here at Let's Talk is simple to have those conversations that matter the most and to remind you that you don't have to figure out this amazing, complex thing called life alone. We are here to have the conversations beside you and to hopefully give you some tips and tricks and new tools to put in your toolbox to help navigate life a little more simply and smoothly. And just know that we are here for you.
So, as always, if you enjoyed today's session, share it with a friend, like, subscribe, do all the things, and keep the conversation going with us.
Because when we talk,
We really talk.
and anything is possible
So, let's talk
with real conversations.
and limitless possibilities. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye bye.